You're pulling up floorboards in an old house. Maybe it's yours, maybe you're just helping out a friend with renovations. The wood is warped and soft, and the crawl space underneath smells like dust and wet earth. And that's when you see it, a jar. It's not a food jar, it's not decorative, just glass, and it's cloudy and old. The lid is sealed in wax that's gone dark and cracked, like something burned through a long time ago. Inside, you see hair, thread, a few nails curled and rusted. There's something that looks like ash, and tucked behind it all, a piece of paper with something handwritten. Most of it's gone to stain, but you can still make out the curve of a name. You don't know who put it there or when, but you know what it feels like. Heavy, wrong, meant to stay buried. These kinds of jars turn up more often than you'd think. Under hearthstones in Georgia and behind chimneys in Virginia. They're inside walls that no one has opened in 100 years. And they weren't misplaced. They were planted there. Some folks call them witch bottles. Others say hex jars or trouble jars. It doesn't matter what you call them. What matters is this. Someone wanted something sealed, and now it's not. I'm Papa G, and this is the Feral Folklorist. Today we're digging into witch bottles and hidden hexes, where they're found, what they carry, and why what you uncover in a jar might not be meant for you at all. Let's start in England, sometime around the late 1500s. The word witch meant more than a person who practiced magic. Back then, it meant someone who could harm you with just looking at you. Someone who could curdle milk, they could cause a miscarriage, or send fever throughout your house without setting a foot inside. Then the devil was a real figure in everyday life. And if you thought someone was working against you, you didn't go to court. You went to the hearth and you started gathering what you had. That's where the witch bottle came in. The earliest ones showed up in the 16th and 17th century, mostly in England and some in Germany. And these were bottles that were filled with urine and bent nails. They had pins and sometimes iron and hair or ash. Sometimes people would put blood in them. They were things that were meant to tangle up whatever was trying to get in. You buried it upside down near the threshold or the hearth or beneath a step, places where energy crossed over. So they were often put near thresholds. And some bottles were made to confuse spirits. Others were made to trap them. And some were just meant to push back on the person who'd sent whatever the problem was, whatever the dark magic was. Especially if they use urine, because it created a link between the bottle and the target. So if you throw in some sharp metal and a bit of spit, and you had yourself a weapon. Now, these weren't prayers, they were countermeasures. I'm sure that prayers went right along with them, but this was like a metaphysical bomb waiting for a witch to try to cross your threshold. Now, the idea of, we'll say, quote unquote, witch bottles goes much further back to African magic, where people would keep pottery and jars outside of their homes or huts to let spirits enter the jar instead of going into the home. But we're jumping a little bit further ahead in history when it took on the name witch bottle and what that actually meant. So as people crossed the Atlantic and they came to America, they didn't leave this practice behind. It traveled with settlers. It came with enslaved Africans. who became root workers, and it changed form. In America, the bottle got new names, it got new jobs. So if you jump to the 1800s in the South, folks started calling them trouble jars. The purpose was very similar, but the materials and intentions sort of widened. Now you could make a jar to bind someone. You could make one to drive them out. You might be to protect a home or to sour a rival's peace or their prosperity. And you didn't need formal training to do this, just the right ingredients and the will to use them. In hoodoo, the bottle spell became a standard working. A lot of us do jar spells. I have done many honey jar spells for good and souring jars for more baneful work. And the ingredients are adjusted according to your landscape, actually. It could be red brick dust that's inside and graveyard dirt. You might use sulfur or vinegar. Once again, rusty nails, thread, blood, and pins. There's always something you have around the house that will work in these jars. Sometimes you write things on just brown paper. To use or repurpose an old brown paper bag was a very traditional hoodoo method for writing out a petition. Some people would actually fold in herbs, and herbs have different connotations to magic. So if you knew the meanings behind the herbs, the magical meanings, these were a very powerful tool to help enhance your jar work. And the container itself didn't matter that much. What mattered was sealing it right, hiding it deep so it couldn't be found, and not forgetting what you've done. So these jars, they were buried under porches, and people put them behind fireplaces. They were inside walls. They were never on display like we do now. They weren't spells you bragged about. They were very private, and they were tucked out of reach. These days, a lot of people, let's take the honey jar, for example, which is meant more for good things. It's meant to make things sweet on you. A lot of people burn candles on top of them, and they're out on their altars where they can continue to work them and use them. These jars, it was a one-time deal where you did what you had to do, and then you hid it somewhere and just let it do its magic. So even now you'll hear stories, contractors pulling up floorboards and they're finding a jar stuffed with hair and nails, or families renovating a home and uncovering something behind the bricks, and it makes the room feel heavier when it's discovered. In Georgia, they found a jar behind a fireplace. In it were black thread, bent nails, and a piece of paper with Psalm 109 written backwards. That psalm isn't a comforting one, it's a curse. That kind calls for a man's name to be erased. Now, if you go over to Mississippi, there are some old folklore records that talk about jars buried under thresholds. And they're meant to drive men mad or to break up homes or to keep enemies from crossing the line. And if we come over to here to Tennessee, there was a couple who was pulling a jar out from under their stairs. And within a week, things in the house started moving. The air felt wrong, and a conjure worker actually told them flat out that they had released something and that they had better put it back. Even when these jars get cataloged by historians, they're often labeled as ritual debris or folk objects, because even though someone's an historian, doesn't necessarily mean that they're a folklorist or that they believe in magic or the metaphysical world. So they often get these labels that don't align with the magical world. But if you've ever written a name on paper and folded it with thread and buried it under the moonlight, you know it's more than that. And this kind of working isn't just Southern or British either. In Eastern Europe, folks buried jars of iron and herbs at thresholds to block out sickness. In Scotland, they buried bones and stones tucked under barn floors to keep livestock safe. And if you go all the way to the Caribbean, you have bundles that were nailed into trees or roofings to trap illness or to send harm back. And here we have the Pennsylvania Dutch, where hex bottles were used to seal out evil. Most of us think of the hex signs found on barns. I actually collect these signs and symbols, and sometimes I actually paint them myself. But we're talking about the tradition of actually building hex bottles, and they would hide them in the walls, and that was meant to seal out evil, where it created this sort of barrier where evil couldn't get in. Even in Creole Catholic homes, the same practice showed up behind saint statues. A bottle would be wrapped in black cloth and tucked behind the Virgin Mary statue. So it wasn't being pious. It wasn't a religious practice they were doing that was solely Christian. It was protection work. And the rule for it all is very simple. If something dangerous is coming, you bury something that says stop. These jars weren't made for beauty. They were made for pressure. You weren't asking nicely. You weren't giving instructions. And the bottle made sure they stuck, that this magic stayed in place and did what it was supposed to do. It's supposed to protect you or ward off evil. That's why most of them were hidden. Not because the work was shameful, but because it was meant to operate in the dark. And if someone found it, that meant the contract had been disturbed. And contracts like that don't always break clean. Now, let's talk about what these jars actually do and why people made them the way they did. So a witch bottle, a hex jar, trouble bottle, whatever we're going to call it, it's not just a container. It's a working. It's a spell made physical. So you're not just looking at a bunch of junk sealed in glass. You're looking at someone's intentions that they built up layer by layer. Each thing they put in that jar had probably a sentence behind it or a prayer behind it. And each part of that jar tells you something about what they were doing. Most of them start with the personal link. In Hoodoo, that's called a personal concern, which is a form of tag lock, a magical tag lock, something that ties the work to the person, which is hair or nail clippings, a bit of cloth from someone's clothing, or if you don't have any of that, their name written on paper, usually 7 times, sometimes 3 times. Without that, the jar doesn't know where to go. It doesn't know who to target. It's like mailing a package with no address. So if you ever find a jar with a name inside or anything that came from a body, that jar had a job to do. Okay, so next you've got the binding materials. Thread, very common, usually red or black. Sometimes it's tied in knots and sometimes wrapped around other items. In folk magic, red thread binds action. It can stop someone from leaving, such as maybe a husband is going to walk out on his wife soon and she knows it, so she stops it from happening. It can keep someone from speaking freely or sort of tangle them in their own mess, their own mistakes. This would be more baneful work. Now, black thread tends to mean something's being shut down completely. It's like a full stop. You'll also see pins and needles woven through the thread. What that is, that's pain and it's conflict and entanglement they're causing. And the more tangled it is, the more stuck the person was meant to be. Then we have metal, which you've got rusty nails and bent pins, old screws. Some would use old metal washers. And these aren't random. They're chosen for their condition because rust means decay. It means long-term, ongoing damage. It's something that lingers because it's not quick. It happens slow over time. It's like this slow rot. And you bury that in a jar and you're telling the spell to work over time to sort of grind the person down, not just slice them open. You want it to be a slow burn. And sometimes you'll find dirt packed in. Graveyard dirt adds weight. It adds a spiritual pressure. It's a sense of finality. If it's dirt from a crossroads, that can mean confusion or obstruction or forcing someone to choose a direction they didn't want to take. If you use dirt from a churchyard, it might carry a more spiritual authority. Or dirt from maybe your own threshold means you're anchoring the working to a specific place. Then you've got all the hot stuff. You can put in red peppers. There's sulfur. A lot of people use vinegar for souring. These ingredients heat up a jar. They agitate things and they keep the energy moving. So in a sour jar, vinegar is meant to spoil someone's peace. In a hex jar, red pepper burns their name every time it's spoken. And sulfur that's really an old school ingredient, which smells terrible. And, it really hits them like a punishment. You don't include sulfur unless you really, really mean business. And sometimes you'll find other liquids. There could be urine or alcohol, and we discussed vinegar, and maybe even an oil. And that's the things that carry the energy to keep the contents alive and moving. Think of it as like the fluid in a battery. If it's sealed well, the jar stays live. If it's cracked or leaking, the work is already unraveling. And then we come to the seal. If a jar is just capped, it might have been meant to be opened again. Maybe the worker wants to refresh it or update it or work it over time. It can also mean that a working is temporary. If someone were misbehaving, you could actually be sending the message that I'm going to keep this working. Your life is going to sour. It's going to go bad until you do right by me. And when you do right by me, I'll open the jar and release you. So that could be a reason why one isn't sealed up. But if it's wax sealed, that usually means finality. A boundary has been crossed. You're not supposed to mess with it. Some jars are dipped entirely in wax, and that is a full lockdown, and it's meant to stay untouched. In hoodoo and root work, jars like this are often buried under stairs or threshold because these are the places people cross, like we said before. That way the target walks over their own working every day. This can be done by being very sneaky and going to someone's property late in the evening, early in the morning before they get up, and maybe you bury it somewhere where they would walk every day. Maybe it's the edge of a driveway where they're going to walk there to get to their car or something. But it is making sure their footsteps go over it every single day. Sometimes jars are placed near heat. They could be put near fireplaces or chimneys so those contents stay warm and keep moving. A hot jar needs motion. And in a lot of Appalachian traditions, jars might be hidden in walls or rafters to keep the energy contained. It wants to be out of sight, but it's still active. And if someone opens it by accident, it's common to feel the air shift. You feel a change going on. Some folks report headaches. Others say the room goes still. So it's not just superstition, it's energy displacement. So what do you do if you find one? The first rule is don't open it. Not right away, at least. Take note of where it was found. Look at what's inside without disturbing it. If it's protective, you might want to reseal it and leave it in place. If it feels wrong, heavy and hostile or just off, you've got some options. You can wrap it in cloth, usually black cloth, and bury it far away from the house or work a reversal spell. But opening it without a plan, that's just bad magic. These jars weren't meant for display. They were made to work. And if you find one, you're stepping into a contract someone else started. So it's best to treat that with respect. A spell sealed in glass still holds, and it knows what it was meant to do. So if you're stepping in the way of it, you might be stepping right into trouble. Now, sometimes these jars sit in dirt for decades without bothering anyone. Other times, they start working the second they've been disturbed. We've heard plenty of stories from folks who found them by accident. Contractors, homeowners, folks doing renovations, like we talked about, for places they just bought. They don't know what they're looking at, so they open it, or they throw it out, or worse, they break it. That's usually when things start to shift. Not big stuff at first, just maybe a change in the room, or the air gets heavier. Pets won't cross thresholds. Maybe they won't go into certain rooms. Appliances might start acting strange. And people have reported feeling like the house started watching them. There's a story from East Tennessee of an old white farmhouse, and the family started hearing footsteps in the walls, which is strange. Footsteps inside the walls. Not the ceiling, not the floors, just the walls. Then they found the jar. It had hair, red thread, nails, and a name written on the inside of the lid. So obviously they opened it. Nobody in the house recognized it, but they wrapped it in black cloth and they went and buried it at a crossroads. And after that, all the noises stopped. Then there's another case of a mason jar that fell out of a bathroom wall during some demolition work, and it shattered on the floor. Inside there was a playing card. It was the Queen of Spades. It had a clump of hair and a rusty nail inside. And the couple who lived in the house started to get sick. They would have headaches, nausea, and then became electrical problems. So they ended up burying the remains of the jar in a graveyard with a coin and some tobacco, and that cleared it up. So you don't need to believe in magic to understand what's happening here. These jars were made with intention, and with intention, when left undisturbed, it holds in place. But when you crack it open without understanding what it was meant to do, you take on responsibility for whatever that energy does next. And not every jar is a curse. Some were meant to protect a home or the people inside it. But most of the time, if it was sealed and hidden, it was meant to stay that way. And that's the thing. Most people don't mean to open them, but the minute they do, something old wakes up. These stories don't always end in disaster, though. Sometimes the fix is as simple as wrapping the jar back up, giving it a proper burial, and walking away from it. Other times it takes a little bit more work. Like we said, doing a reversal, doing a cleansing, speaking prayers out loud. But in every case, the pattern is usually the same. A jar is found, there's a name inside, something changes, and the only way to settle it is to treat the work with respect. Because once a bottle is sealed, it starts counting on being left alone. And once it's broken, you don't get to pretend you didn't touch it. So now we've reached the spell segment of our show where we actually take everything we've talked about and put some magic behind it. So what do you do when you find a spell sealed in glass? First of all, you don't panic. You don't poke around and see what's inside. And you definitely don't throw it in the trash and hope for the best. They weren't meant to be casually opened, these jars. They contain what they contain. It could be pain, protection, or a warning for someone else. That's why your first step is to figure out what you're dealing with. If it looks like it was built to protect, it may be able to continue protecting you. So here's a working you can use to build your own protective jar. And we're going to do another one when you find something that shouldn't have been disturbed. So to build your own protection bottle, this is to create a boundary against spiritual interference and to keep unwanted energy out of your home. What you'll need is a small glass jar or a bottle with a lid. It's better to have a lid that is metal, or you don't want one that's plastic because it can eat away over time. You want something that was meant to last, usually that is meant to be on a glass container or a bottle. You're going to put a petition paper with your name crossed by the word peace and protection and boundary, meaning you're going to write your name one way, turn the paper, and then write peace, protection, and boundary. You're actually creating a cross. You need black salt or crushed eggshell, some red thread, a rusted pin or bent nail. Maybe a lot of nails these days you find they're meant not to rust, so you may have to find some old ones, or just a piece of metal that you know will rust. And then a little bit of rosemary, maybe a bay leaf, could be both. A small shard of mirror or broken glass, and a black candle for sealing. And the steps you're going to take are, you're going to write your petition, fold it towards you 3 times, place it at the bottom of the jar. Then you're going to add your salt or the eggshell, and then wrap the thread around the nail or the pin, and then you drop that in. Then you add your herbs. Then you place the mirror or the glass shards facing outwards. Now, a lot of people are concerned about breaking glass because of the 7 years of bad luck. That superstition usually deals if you had broken a mirror accidentally. So you can go to the craft store and actually find little squares of mirrors that are meant to be put on fabric, or they're meant to be put on wooden boxes or whatever. And you can use those. You can break them or not break them. If you break it on purpose, you're free from the bad luck thing because it is your intention to break it. So after that, you're going to seal the lid, and you're going to drip wax from your black candle all around the edge to seal it fully. Speak clearly as you work. Here's a little thing you can say, or you can make up your own, or maybe you're going to read some Psalms or passages from the Bible. So we've come up with, what's mine stays mine. What's not gets cut. This jar holds the line. And then you bury it under your porch, maybe near a gate or along the property line. If you rent, you can always bury it in a potted plant by the front door. And then you just let it sit. That's the work, and that's all you have to do. You leave it alone after that. So, what to do if you find a jar that's already opened? This is how to safely neutralize disturbed energy from a found jar. And what you're going to need is gloves, black cloth or foil, or both, a bowl of salt water, some Florida water or vinegar, and you need to prepare or plan a place off of your property. It can be a graveyard, a crossroads. It may just be a forest somewhere. And optional would be a coin or honey for an offering. So you don't touch the contents with your bare hands. You're going to wrap the jar in cloth and then wrap it in foil. This is like a double action thing. You clean the area where it came from with the vinegar or the Florida water, and you say out loud, this work is done. This charge is closed. What was held is now disposed. And then you wash your hands thoroughly and cleanse yourself in salt water. Then you go out, bury the jar, the wrapped jar. Remember, you've wrapped it, and you just bury it in silence. So if it feels right, leave a coin or a little bit of honey at the burial site. It's a sweet offering, and that's it. Don't look back. Don't keep the jar as a souvenir. Just let it go. So it looks like we've come to the bottom of the jar of this episode. This is Papa G, and you have been listening to the Feral Folklorist. Next time, we're talking about The Coffin Was Screaming, Appalachian death omens and warnings. We're going to look at the signs that show up before someone passes, like knocking on walls, stop clocks, or mirrors covered in cloth. And we'll talk through what they mean, why these things still happen, and how to keep your boundaries clean when death moves through. But until then, if you find an old jar, don't open it. If you'd like to hear the After the Show episode where I go deeper into the folklore, spill a little extra dirt, and sometimes rant just a bit, consider becoming a patron over on my Patreon at patreon.com/PapaG. You can find the official site for the podcast at feralfolklorist.com. And if you need spell supplies for any of the workings we talk about on the show, our metaphysical shop, Aromagees Botanica, has been slinging magic for 25 years. That's over at aromagees.com.